This is the MTG Sold Weekly Podcast. You're listening to the week of June 1st through June 7th, 2026. Hey everyone, quieter week. 6,100 units, just over $1 million in revenue, down about 24% in volume from last week. But that number needs some context, because last week had mayhem baked into it. If you strip the mayhem spike out of last week's data, the surrounding days ran about 786 units per day. This week averaged about 875, so the actual underlying pace might have slightly improved. The top line decline is really just the absence of a sale day. The more interesting shift is the product mix. Average revenue per unit went up from $155 to $171. The market moved fewer boxes, but the boxes it moved were more expensive. Marvel Superheroes accounted for over 40% of total revenue by itself. That one IP is carrying the week. All right, let me get into the supply side, because there are 3 stories this week, and they are all doing different things. Jumping into the headlines, Marvel is absorbing everything. I want to start with Marvel Superheroes, because the sell-through numbers are kind of remarkable. The Marvel Superheroes Collector Booster Display posted a sell-through ratio of 2.98. Again, if you're new here, sell-through ratio is just a metric to see the price and, the sell amount and the supply amount. And positive ratio means the supply to sell-through ratio is good. In this case, we have a positive of 2.98, 0 being neutral, 1 being positive, minus 1 being negative. So again, Marvel Collector Booster Display posted a sell-through of 2.98, a ratio of 2.98. Nearly 3 units sold for every unit of average listed inventory. I say that again. Nearly 3 units sold for every unit of average listed inventory. 707 units moved at $469 volume-weighted average price. Supply dropped 28% week over week, and sellers dropped 7%. The Play Booster display is even more telling because it has a much bigger inventory pool, 543 average quantity, and still posted a ratio of 1.47 sell-through. 799 units on 543 average supply means demand is chewing through listings faster than they appear. And this is the high-volume product, not the premium one. And the gift bundle came in at a sell-through ratio of 1.98. 3 products sell above the 1.0 sell-through ratio from the same set in the same week. That is most unusual. Most sets maybe have 1 product running hot at any given time. Marvel has 3 across 3 different price tiers, with the collector booster nearly at 3x. Now, the obvious question is whether this is sustainable or whether a distributor restock just hasn't landed yet. IP crossover products can cool fast once the novelty passes and the distributor waves show up without warning. There is one puzzle worth naming, though. A collector booster is absorbing at nearly 3x, and the price barely moved, down 0.25%, flat. One possible explanation, mayhem last week may have already cleared out the cheapest tier of listings. If that's right, then the $469 floor is firm, and what is draining now is mid-price depth rather than fresh, low-price inventory. Price moves show up once the remaining depth thins another notch. If it's wrong and a restock wave hits, sell-through normalizes, and the whole ratio loses its meaning. But right now, the numbers are saying demand is real and supply is behind. If that 237 average quantity on the collector booster drops below 200 next week, while sell-through holds, you're looking at a genuine supply crunch on a $469 product. That is kind of a thing that tends to move price upward, whether sellers want it or not. In the next headline, Strixhaven is sorting its own hierarchy. This one is interesting because it happens inside a single set. The Secret of Strixhaven bundle dropped 13%, breaking below $49 for the first time, and supply grew 18%. Sellers grew 9%. The bundle is where everyone is dumping new inventory. Meanwhile, 2 Strixhaven commander decks went the other direction. Silver Quill Influence gained 12% on shrinking supply. Listings down 10.5%, sellers down 15.4%. That is a classic tightening pattern. Fewer people listing, fewer units available, price climbing. Prismari Artistry gained 10.5% too, though against growing supply, which makes it a weaker signal. What I think is happening is pretty straightforward. The bundle is the cheapest way into Strixhaven Sealed. So when sellers get inventory they want to move quickly, they list bundles. That pushes the bundle supply up and the bundle price down. The commander decks are lower volume, more collector-oriented, and the sellers who hold those are less motivated to race to the bottom. So the product line is stratifying. The entry-level product gets cheaper, while the specialty products hold or gain. The question for next week is whether the bundle finds a floor around $49. Sell-through is actually still solid at a ratio of 0.32. Demand exists at this price. If the supply influx slows down even a little, $49 could be the support. But if sellers keep piling in, there is room for it to drift lower before stabilizing. For this next section, I want to do a new segment called Last Week's Callouts and How Did They Do? And so I'm going to try to follow up on things I flagged because it's easy to make predictions and then never check on them. And I kind of want to avoid having to do that, or avoid doing that in general. So some callouts. Edge of Eternity's the Play Booster display. Last week I said this was the demand test. Supply had grown 34% and the price held. And the question was whether it would hold again. It did not. Price dropped 6.2% this week. Supply grew another 27%. Sell-through is 0.40, which is decent, but the inventory buildup is winning the race. The initial scarcity premium is fading, and the product is settling into whatever its equilibrium price is going to be. The commander decks from that set are still holding up though. World Shaper gained 13.6% this week with healthier supply dynamics. Another call out from last week was the Lauren Eclipse commander deck Blight Curse. Last week, this was the oversupply poster child. Sell-through ratio of 0.09, supply stacking, price falling. This week it bounced 14%, which looks great on paper until you notice it was 21 units and average quantity grew to 412. The bounce happened on nothing. 21 units against 400 units of supply is not a trend reversal, it's noise. If anything, the fact that supply kept growing makes this product situation worse, not better. The price bounce is a mirage. And then another call out, these are two bundled together. Commander Masters Collector Booster Box and Lost Caverns Commander Deck Case. Last week's twin 4X sell-through stories both dropped out of the movers cohort entirely this week. They did not decline and they did not stabilize. They just went quiet. Volume dried up enough that they fell below the reporting threshold. A cohort dropout is not a thesis confirmed or refuted. It's the data going silent. The supply-driven reversal I flagged last week is stalled, not resolved. I will keep checking. There's nothing new to say until transactions pick back up. And finally, on callouts, Final Fantasy Chocobo Bundle. Last week, I flagged the seller count dropping 27% and said to watch whether it crossed below 50 sellers. It did. Sellers fell to 45.6 this week. Volume-weighted average price held essentially flat at $241, while average quantity drained another 22% to 96.9. Sell-through cooled from 0.64 to 0.54. So the buying tempo slowed, but the supply side kept thinning anyway. The product is doing that thing where the pool quietly shrinks while no one is looking at it because the price is not moving. If sellers keep exiting at this rate, the price catches up eventually. And that's it for our callouts from last week. Jumping into some more forward-looking thoughts. Avatar is doing something weird. This is a quick one, but I want to flag it because it doesn't fit the normal patterns. Avatar The Last Airbender Collector Booster Display dropped 6% on price. Normally when I see a price decline, I look at supply and see inventory growing. That is the standard story. More supply than demand can absorb, price adjusts. Here, supply is down 16%. Sellers are down 8.5%. The pool is shrinking. Price declining while supply also declines is not a great signal. It usually means demand is softening rather than losing a race against new listings. When sellers are leaving and inventory is dropping and the price still can't hold, the buyers may be drying up. It is 25 units at 374 volume-weighted average price. So this isn't a huge sample, but it's the one product this week where the supply and price combination is going in an unusual direction, and I think it's worth keeping an eye on. If next week's supply drops again and the price drops again, you have a product with a demand problem, not a supply problem. Those behave differently. Two more things. Foundation's Collector Booster Display is doing something familiar. Supply down 28%, average quantity at 36.2, sell-through 0.69, price creeping up to 710. If that average quantity number sounds familiar, it should. Commander Masters Collector Booster Box was sitting at 36 when I started flagging it 3 weeks ago. That product is still draining. Foundations is now at the same inventory level on a product that costs nearly twice as much. I'm not drawing a direct comparison because demand profiles are different, but the supply mechanics are rhyming. Worth a quiet bookmark. And then there's the Doctor Who Commander deck display. Sell-through of 0.97 on an average quantity of just 22.8. Exactly a 1-to-1 ratio. Demand is absorbing supply at exactly the same rate it appears. 22 units of average quantity is generally thin for any product, and a ratio of 0.97 is the kind of ratio where one solid buying week tips it into crunch territory. It only moved 22 units for $5,868 this week. The dollar volume is small, but the ratio is the interesting part. If sell-through ticks above 1.0 next week on the same supply base, this quietly becomes one of the tightest products on the market. Jumping into what to watch for next week's segment, 5 things this week. 1. Marvel Superheroes Collector Booster Display. Average quantity is 237, sell-through is nearly 3x, and supply is falling 28% per week. If that holds, this product reprices upward. If a distributor dump lands and the supply jumps, the whole dynamic resets. The number to watch is average quantity. If it drops below 200, the crunch is real. 2. The Strixhaven bundle at $49. Sell-through is still decent. If the supply build slows and $49 holds, the product line repricing within Strixhaven is probably done. If it breaks below $49 on continued inventory growth, there is more room to fall. Either way, the Commander decks seem to be decoupling from the bundle, which is worth noting for anyone holding Strixhaven sealed. 3. Avatar: The Last Airbender Collector Booster Display. I want another data point on the price down, supply down combination. 1 week of it is a curiosity. 2 weeks of it is a pattern that tells you something about where collector demand sits for that IP at the $375 price point. 4. Foundation's Collector Booster Display at 36 average quantity. If it drops below 30 next week, which with a sell-through still above 0.5, that 710 price point starts to look like a floor rather than a ceiling. This one could quietly move while everyone is watching Marvel. 5. Doctor Who Commander deck display. The 0.97 sell-through on 22.8 average quantity is right on the edge. If it crosses a sell-through ratio of 1.0 next week, flag it. If supply drops below 20, flag it harder. Small dollar volume, but the mechanics are coiled. That's it. Numbers are in their full report on MTG Sold article. See you next week.